How should you prepare for a pitch? What should you do during the pitch? And the follow-up bit as well.
And don't underestimate the visual impact or the response impact when people see very impressive visual things. It's that eye candy.
What's your lasting impression with people that can carry on? How do you develop that after the pitch?
You know your product, so your product or service well, and you're very clear on what makes you different and what your value proposition is, then the rest should follow and you'll be able to cope with any question.
I always think storytelling is quite important for this type of thing. Definitely. Nobody wants to sit through something that's just click here, click here.
They don't want a monologue, a lecture, do they? They don't want someone reading off a PowerPoint.
Good.
We're good.
So I've got a little intro for you today.
Go on then.
So my lad, he's getting mad keen on business. He's locked in, apparently.
That's the phrase. You have said before that he's interested in business.
He's very interested. So the other day,
father like son.
He got a year 8 business studies exam. So I thought, who better to ask some of these questions than Mr. Parry? So, what's job production?
What is job production?
Job production versus flow production.
Oh, I see. Different production types. Yeah. So that's batch manufacturing, isn't it? You do a job at a time, not saying. Flow is what Henry Ford perfected with his production line. Single piece flow, lean, all that. What
is meant by capital intensive?
A lot of capital investment required to get it going.
Exactly.
So a steel plant in Scunthorpe is a bit harder to set up from a capital point of view than a HubSpot agency.
And Boston Matrix, did you?
Boston Consulting Grid, same thing. Yeah. Cash cows, dogs, rising stars, problem childs.
There we go. You passed the year 8 exam.
Oh, phew. It would have been a bit embarrassing. I would have had Wendy Blower on my case, the business teacher.
That's his form tutor as well.
Oh, gosh.
So, yeah.
Make sure I didn't disgrace myself with that then.
So, yeah, I thought I've had that little stored away. Thought, there we go.
Well done. Well, thank you for testing me on that.
He's locked in now.
I'm now going to get a little test set up for you next time.
Oh, great.
He's locked in the phrase, is it?
That's locked in is like it's when you focus. So he came into me yesterday and said, "Can you buy me a chin-up bar?"
Right.
Because he's getting into calisthenics and he came home yesterday and he bought himself protein bars and protein shakes. So he's getting ready.
Got to watch that one. That's got an edge to it.
He's getting
Could
ready.
Be good, but be careful it doesn't become
ready
obsessive.
for the bulk. So.
Well, I did tell you the other day, I'm now entered into my first High Rocks event. It's not till October, so I've got a few months to worry about it. Maybe we'll get me to High Rocks when he's old enough.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, well, thank you for that little business studies test, just to keep me on my feet.
Year 8.
People won't know listening, but this is at the end of a working week, late on a Friday, so I'm glad I got through it. Shall we do a podcast?
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the SME Growth Podcast from Wellmeadow. Every week we try and come up with something new and interesting for owners and managers of small and medium-sized enterprises. And we're back with me and Rich again.
It's been a while.
Well, we had a couple of guests, haven't we, recently?
Yeah.
So last week we had Tracy Miller on, and that was you discussing membership organisations.
And building business communities.
I thought that was really interesting, that you both came across as very passionate about it, and I know that's what you chose that subject because it happened to align with what she runs, but it's something that you're quite keen on. And we've both been involved in them, haven't we? Membership organisations, business leaders who get together and share thoughts. And if anybody listening isn't in a mastermind group, an ACE group, a Vistage group, something like that, then look them up. It's a great outlet for your frustrations, energies, ideas, isn't it?
Yeah,
peer group.
Good thing to do.
The week before that, we had another guest. Someone I know quite well, my daughter, who's 18 as it happens, and she gave us a bit of an insight into Gen Z thinking.
This has probably been the episode that's had the most feedback, I would say.
Bizarrely, it has. Well, bizarrely or not, we didn't talk too much about business directly, did we? But we've had an awful lot of feedback from that. And thank you, everybody who sent everything from voice notes, emails, ringing us up to tell us how much they enjoyed that episode.
Yeah, she came across very well.
She did. She was very pleased. So interested to see if she gets some reactions when she goes back to uni after the Easter break.
Famous.
If she tells her friends that she was even on it. And then before that, we did one on economics. That was the week, though, that Trump went mad, wasn't it? And that was the week he put all of his 125% tariffs on and 20% here and 40% there. taxing penguin-infested islands in the Pacific. So we used that as our trigger to have one on does economics matter? Do you need to know about economics? And we covered a few key topics, didn't we, for business people?
Yeah.
And I always give you a chance to pick one from the archives now, because we can't talk about that one, whatever it was that you liked before. So pick one from the archives.
Dirty data. Well, this week was some of the more observant followers of the podcast will have noticed that there were two Tudor-esque gentlemen hosting the podcast from a year ago when we did one on the various stages of business growth based off a Shakespeare How You Like 'Em.
That famous Shakespeare quote, which was also a carry-on. How you like it?
You've not read that very obscure work of the bard.
Quite. It may have changed its name over the centuries. You probably started out something more like As You Like It. And then the retelling over the centuries has distorted it.
As they say, you wouldn't understand English from.
It ain't half up.
You wouldn't understand English from the 15th century anyway. So
exactly.
What I've done there for everybody,
I see what we've done there.
Is take it and put it into modern English vocabulary, so you can have that for free.
However you want them.
However you want them.
Called,
So this is a point. It's a bit like that meme. Is that Homer Simpson meme where he just disappears into the hedge?
Yes.
That's me at this point.
Well, I think you've done a very good job there of modernising. We should do a modernised version.
That's what I'm all about.
Of Bill Shakespeare. So, episode 23 is probably worth a little dial back to. We did put a link up to it on LinkedIn in the week. So see what we do with that. So they were the last few. So it brings us to this week. And what, pray tell, Mr. Buckle, are we going to talk about this week?
Sales pitches.
Sales pitches. Different from 10 pitches.
Yeah. Well, depends on what you're selling, isn't it, really? You're selling tents.
You're selling tents, yeah. Sales pitches then. So a presentation is a pitch, isn't it?
Yeah.
With the intent to sell something.
Well, we had to do one this week, which is a bit different to our normal kind of pitches, isn't it?
Yeah.
We don't normally pitch, I wouldn't say.
No, we're normally doing discovery calls or something like that. People have invited us in and we're part educating, part discovery qualifying and part helping. But this one was definitely a pitch. We were up against some other providers, Microsoft and some other software vendors. And we were pitching on behalf of HubSpot, or our services related to it, plus their software. So it's quite an interesting experience, wasn't it?
It was an interesting experience, and it was kind of interesting to reflect on it, thinking...
We had a long drive home where we could talk about it all.
And just thinking through the whole process of how should you prepare for a pitch, what should you do during the pitch, and the follow-up bit as well. Yeah. And just how do you break that down? So we thought, well, maybe that's something that's worth having a conversation about. Yeah.
The before, during and after of a pitch.
And some anecdotal information you've had today, just because we've been discussing it with a few people, was that a lot of salespeople struggle with pitching.
Yeah, they don't necessarily relish it. They get quite nervous about it, will do everything to avoid it, which surprised me because I thought salespeople were, not everybody likes this sort of stuff, but they were the self-selecting part of society that did like this sort of stuff. They were quite extrovert naturally, quite confident, could talk coherently and eloquently. But you realise that there's a whole mixture of stuff, even in people that can talk confidently. And it's a bit like Tracy talked about in her episode a few weeks ago of imposter syndrome. And if you don't know your stuff, people are worried about getting caught out or not being able to answer questions. So, yeah, there was an interesting bit of...
I think that's definitely maybe the bit with a pitch, isn't it? Because you don't quite know what you're going into sometimes. And you have that, well, can we ask questions as we go along? And then that can take it off on a... So if you've only got your patter down as a kind of... If you don't know your onions... Yeah. I'm sure that's a Shakespearean quote.
I'm sure
then,
it is. Then nearly everything is.
Knoweth not thine onions. But then that, I can see how that could be a little bit off-putting to people.
Yeah, so, and you're right. Okay, so we'll get into a bit of this thing. So before we get into that, which all happened in the pitch, there was quite a lot of work that got done prior to the pitch. And it started a few weeks ago with a call with the key people, setting it up, explaining what they wanted, how they're going to run the day and all that, and a few jiggles around on format and stuff.
Yeah.
But that's going to happen anyway. The main thing was what we did then, having received that information to help us prepare. Now, you took the lead on this. So talk me through sort of the main steps of what you had to think about when you were preparing for how to run our precious 60-minute slot.
Yeah, I think it helps in... And you may or you may not get this if you're having to do a pitch, but there was kind of quite a comprehensive... Well, there were two things. There was a kind of an approach they wanted. They wanted to cover off certain sort of...
not quite questions, but areas.
Not questions, but areas, things they wanted to achieve using HubSpot. And
a mixture of how does it do that,
behaviors.
And how will we do such and such, and can it do thingy-me? And
but they also then provided a kind of weighted rubric of what they're actually looking for. In terms
rubric, that's an academic term, isn't it?
Academic term.
So you're just showing off now, making up.
Well,
explain for our humble listener what a rubric is.
It's
weighted scores.
It's a weighted scores. It's just like a list of things they're looking for in terms of what they want to cover off. So that made it. I'd say that probably made it a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Because you've almost got an agenda there in terms of what you want to go through.
There was a bizarre contradiction there, wasn't there?
There was.
The running order of the questions they said they wanted to cover wasn't in order of importance. It was some other order.
Yeah.
And the scoring had been done in descending order of importance.
So in the end, I decided to go for their scoring weightings, start with what they were scoring the highest, and just go through it logically. Because what I figured, if someone's gone to that level of effort to put that together, they're probably going to have a little sheet of paper where they're ticking stuff off.
And guess what?
About that? And guess what? They did.
On the day they did.
So in order to make it easy for them to follow their own scoring thing, because we all know what it's like if you're doing an interview or something, you're trying to write stuff down and observe, and if you don't want to be flicking between things and jumping around. So, and there was one or two bits where I thought, well, logically, this doesn't quite flow from that. So we jiggled a few little things around. So so what we did was try to, I always think storytelling is quite important for this type of thing. Definitely. Nobody wants to sit through something that's just click here, click here.
They don't want a monologue, a lecture, do they? They don't want someone reading off a PowerPoint.
So you want to try and make it into a story. So, and then I think we came up with the idea of using Canva with images in, but they were all clickable through into a live system so that you could actually demonstrate and jump in and out of those two. And that actually worked really, really well. So if you're demonstrating a SaaS product, that kind of, because you can sort of tell the narrative with the presentation, and then, if you want to see the detail of how this works, because some things are just easier to show. Yeah.
So very visual though, very interactive.
Visual. Yeah. Tried to come up with a little bit of the, the whole sort of meme thing going around on LinkedIn at the moment with a little, make yourself into a little character.
A product in a bubble pack.
Product in a bubble pack thing. So I made a couple of those just to demonstrate.
That made them smile.
Yeah, that was kind of, I think
trend.
On trend. I think that's kind of important. Bring a little bit of levity to these things and just try and.
But that was what we
do that.
For.
So
we also worked out that they had a very long list when you broke it down to the sub points they were asking about. We weren't going to be able to spend longer than sort of 90 seconds to 2 minutes on each point, which you think, well, flip, they could spend a lot of time on each of those. Yeah. So I thought the way you'd done that was very clever because you made it a very high-paced, high adrenaline, wham, bam, 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 look at this, it does that, it does that, we do this, solve that, we could do that. And every time you said, we can go into that in more detail if you like, but not now because we've only got an hour. Yeah. So that was all structured.
Well, and I think as well, we had an hour, so I sort of factored 45 minutes by the time you put Q&A and everything else in. Yeah. And then I broke it down by, so this section they want to give 25% of the marks to. Yeah. So let's give that 25% of the 45 minutes. So whatever that works out in, 11 minutes, 12 minutes, something like that. Go through it that way, and that you're getting the right amount of material then for the right amount of what you're doing. So there's kind of the content creation bit. Some of the stuff I did as well. I made some quick videos which I double sped just to show various things.
That was quite a good important point, I think, especially when you're showing the usability of a system-y type thing. Yeah. Watching somebody painfully click through, wait for the screen to refresh, and then do the next thing, and then find the button. Whereas double speed, and then you can do the speed
video,
up typing
and then
thing.
You can kind of talk it over. And oh, look, there you go. There's lots of stuff happening. Look how easy it is. Click, click, click. There you go. Bang.
And don't underestimate the visual impact or the response impact when people see very impressive visual things. It's that eye candy. And it's probably a bit like when people are looking around a house thinking about buying it, they can't help but look at the furniture and the decor, and they're not going to be there when you buy it, but that's part of the setting. If you show systems with very nice graphs in them, or there's a bit where we did heat maps, for example, or geographic mapping and things like that as well. They all just look really good and generally give that impression of a good product that people remember well.
So I think as well, the other thing was to have the backup plan. So we had a kind of triple backup plan. So the gold star presentation was going to be Canva online, click on an image that takes you through to HubSpot online. Yeah. Great. But then you've got to think, well, what happens if, and we did have an issue with Wi-Fi and connectivity, which meant that actually it was a little bit slow. So the Canva presentation could have stood alone. You could have gone through it. Yeah,
it's worth knowing that. People may not realise, whilst it's a browser-based online presentation tool, for those of you who haven't used Canva, once you've loaded the page up, 50-page slide deck is all taken into memory. So it'll run without internet once you've got it.
So, but then we also had the PDF version of the presentation as a backup to the backup.
On 2 different laptops.
So it's worth thinking. It's worth thinking about, okay, what happens if there isn't an HDMI cable, or the internet's not very good, or don't make your whole presentation rest upon. And we've had some good examples of that in the past. I mean, we did a presentation years ago where people still refer to that when the projector bulb went or something.
I remember it well.
Yeah. And then you just grab the flip chart and start going. And I think what that shows is that you actually know what you're talking about.
And that was the feedback we got at the end of that. I think I may have mentioned that in previous podcasts. So that was one of the most effective ones we did, because everyone was expecting a yawn fest of going through a PowerPoint. Thankfully, the projector broke, grabbed the PowerPoint, the flip chart, started scribbling stuff, told a story. The other thing that I think we did half well but could have done better on is knowing who was going to be there. We were quite surprised there were twice as many people when we turned up as we thought, because we'd done our prep, we sort of knew it was on the invite, and we'd had a pre-meeting anyway. But then there were a load of other people. And I'm sure if we'd have said who else is coming, they would have told us. We made an assumption that it was the people we'd been talking to so far. So we had a number of other departments involved. Bit of research there. Work out who everybody is.
Bit of research.
Could do that.
And then the other thing, just before we move on to the actual, what happens in the pitch.
The before, during, and after.
During is, I think, a bit like we always talk about, if you go to an exhibition, you want to make sure you've done your follow-up first before you go, because it's always that, okay, now we've got these email addresses, what do you do with them? And then it's 5 weeks later and you still haven't emailed anybody. Is making sure that you've got your follow-up prep done before you pitch, so that at the end of it you can push a button and go. Now, we didn't quite get there, so there was some scary moments whilst I was looking at my laptop tethered to my phone whilst your car was deciding it was going to try and do emergency stops down the M1 or whatever. But so that's one thing I think we would improve on going forward, is just making sure you've got that really nailed down, because you could do some quite smoky stuff. At the end, imagine the end of the pitch, you'd just said, right, okay, ping all those links we talked about, you've all got them now. There you go.
Yeah, they're all in your inbox. Well, you drew the parallel with our Magic Minutes software, the meeting software that we use a lot and we've written. And that, at the end of a meeting, gets the ping, sends out everybody's PDF copy of the minutes before the meeting, before they even stood up out of their chair. And it's that moment of thinking, I don't have to now wait on what they're going to send me. And of course, you've still got a chance to.
But it's an evergreen. So what we've built here is like an evergreen demo as well. So we can use it wherever we go. And it's also, what I wanted to do is make something where we've shown you the system. I've now sent you a link. You can go and play with it and get the different emails and get the different experiences and get the different personalization depending on what interactions you have with it.
Yeah, we've built it for them, but it could be used by anyone.
But it could be used by anyone. But it's given them that you can now explore this at your own pace. And also, because of the way that it all works,
we know if
you are playing with it. So.
And they know that. They know that we know that they know.
Yeah, so it's all very...
Yeah, good. So there's probably a lot more to it, but that's a good summary of the prep beforehand. As you say, make sure technically you can cope whatever happens, but tell the story and make sure you do it in a non-boring way and prepare for the after. Okay, so that's the prep bit. During then, so you turn up, hopefully you're on time. Remember when Steve Arnold came on the podcast a few weeks ago?
That was in our minds.
He said, get there well before, set up a forward operating base.
So we did that in Nero's.
Cafe Nero, we were there plenty of time, and we were doing fine-tuning to the slide deck, running through it all again, but you don't have to worry then about some crash on the way, not getting there on time.
Yeah.
We even talked about doing hotel overnight, didn't we, if it were to be a morning one. So get there on time, and then you go in, and this is the bit that I think, even though they've done a few of them, they were still sort of working out how to do it best. Because whilst they'd given us an hour slot, they wanted to use a bit of that to introduce everybody in the room, which of course is useful for us to know who the personas are, but we could probably have taken that offline beforehand and given us a seating plan and that sort of thing. And then we had some of the IT slowdowns of the Wi-Fi, all eating into your time all the time. So you've got to keep it light. We had a quick intro. We want to split the speakers up between the two of us, so it wasn't just one person talking, one person sat in the background. And you're trying to work out who in the room have you got to make eye contact with at any time. And it's interesting that, okay, we were doing that face-to-face, but even on Zoom ones, I find that really important. And I bought one of these cameras that sticks on the screen with a little sticky suction pad, because I don't like it when I'm on the other end and someone's looking to their other screen or over the top of the screen. So I can make sure that the content I'm looking at is right behind my little sticky on camera. So I'm looking down the barrel of my inside. I'd like to think that's what they're thinking. I don't know. I've not had any feedback. So if anybody listening has been on a Zoom meeting with me, do they notice? I'm staring at them.
But yeah, so there's that whole kind of build rapport. I think you'll be careful here as well not to kind of try and go in, be too funny at the start.
Yeah, I think that's a very personal thing, humour. You've got to be careful.
You've got to
keep it light. Yeah,
read the room.
Yeah, read the room. Even what you wear, what sort of standard of dress you go for. Because we'd had a pre-meeting on Zoom, you could judge, are they all suit and tie types? Are they all jeans and T-shirt types? Or somewhere in between. So smart business casual was order of the day. And then don't just fire up your slide deck and start reading it. I'd almost not want to work with anybody who worked that way anyway. Just if that's all you're going to do, you could have emailed me the deck and I would have just read it out. Same with the video. So you've got to keep it interactive, take questions, like you said earlier, take questions on the way.
We asked that question as well, didn't we? So that's a good thing to ask them at the start. How do you want to play questions? Yeah. Do you want to save them all up for the end? Do you want to do it as you go through? Yeah. And I think just the note of caution on doing it as you go through, you can often end up in a kind of bit of a rabbit warren or being taken off on a different tangent. Yeah. So you've got to be quite disciplined to. And that takes a bit of confidence, doesn't it? Because sometimes you have to say, that's a really important question and I wanted to get into it, but can I put that at the end? Because that's going to take me down a different avenue and I want to show you this bit. Or I might be coming to that later or whatever. You almost need someone to write that down though, don't you? That would be a good thing to do. So if you two of you doing it, if someone's fielding the talking, the other person's writing down, right, okay, they asked that question about so you can come back to X, Y, Z or something, and then you can come back to it. Yeah. It just shows that you're engaging with them, but at the same time, take some post-its or something. I was trying to do as well, when you get the intros at the beginning, draw a little picture of the table layout and the room layout and get the initials written down and their titles so you could come back and refer to people by name because they don't all conveniently wear name tags. And the other one on time management, when one or the other of us was talking, we had a little bit of paper between us and we were trying to manage the time we spent on each of the topics according to the points on their scoring system. Yeah. Because there's no point saying you want us to go through these 6 bullet points, we've got an hour, we'll have 10 minutes on each. Yeah. When the first one was the bulk of the points, where you make sure, therefore, you spend the bulk of the time explaining the thing that's got the bulk of the points, because that's what they're interested in, right? Yeah. And then near the end, you can rattle off some of the 5 and 10 percenters. So that was quite handy today. Yeah, and I think it's good if you can, as part of your prep, but also just thinking on your feet, just think about what kind of stories can you tell. People love stories, so if you can, even the most boring demo, you can come up, there is going to be some user story there or some anecdote that you've had in the past or something where you can relate what other people do, similar industry, and just tell a story. It really helps to just lighten it a little bit and keep. Well, it makes it real as well. Make it real, and it's sort of. You're not reading the textbook. And with all due respect to our HubSpot colleagues who are brilliant at knowing what their software does, they don't have as much experience as the partner community does, like us, where we're actually inside companies dealing with real life stuff that goes right and goes wrong. So we have some of those war stories to tell. And they come across quite well. I think also you ended on a high in some of your bits at the end because we were talking a bit more about the future proofing and the AI developments, and some of that is really eye-opening stuff. So you've gone through a lot of the basics of, how do we nurture leads and how do we do this and how do we attribute blah, blah, blah. And then right then you say, and there's this sexy stuff that it does as well. And look at that. And, and then suddenly people's eyes are on stalks at the end wanting more. Yeah, I think if you just come across like where you're actually interested in this stuff and you care, that's... Yeah, there's some frightening statistics on how many people are unengaged in their job. It's like 80%, 90%. Yeah, crazy, isn't it? So you've got 10% of people who actually are actively engaged and enjoy what they do. according to this one thing I read recently.
Which must be true then.
Which got to be true. It was on this like TikTok-y thing.
Is it? Yeah. Is that what's that then?
Like the Times or something. No, I'm not on TikTok. But I read it somewhere. But so you think you haven't got to do that much to come across as someone that actually cares about this stuff.
Yeah.
And it actually can have a huge impact on a room full of people that are just kind of sitting there going, we want someone to show us that we should be enthused about this as well.
And I think there was a question that came back about the size of companies and, should large companies have large companies that are large themselves who are in their supply base. And it goes back to your point there that even in a large-ish company, the number of people that are really thinking at the top level, really R&D, innovating and passionate about other companies is still the small bit at the top, usually of the founders and their top-level team. So you could have 100 people on your team. A lot of them are just doing stuff. And so if you're looking for innovation, inspiration, and that extra spark that they couldn't create themselves, then really it doesn't matter how big you are.
Well, I'm pretty sure there's some stat that it's something like the square root of the number of employees create 50% of the value in any organisation.
Yeah, I've heard that before, and I've got no idea where it came from.
It's one of those kind of Pareto-y type stats, but you can kind of see it. If you think about the organisation you're in.
Well, back to our Scaling a Business Shakespeare episode earlier, that was what that talked about a lot, that the bigger the company gets, you suddenly amass all of these other departments that you can do without when you're small. Who has a legal or an M&A department when there's only 20 of you? It's one of those effects, isn't it? So I thought, delivering the whole episode, the 60 minutes worth of content, that's obviously the bit that they'll remember, but work out how you're going to help them to do their job. So like you said with the prep, they were having to fill in things. So you're almost feeding them quotes and sound bites and almost imagining, right, if I was now scoring this thing on the screen, what's the one thing I want people to write down? So you're almost thinking like a politician would. What's the takeaway from this? You give them a nice little nugget that's easy to write. Summarize your point in 5 words at the end, move on to the next one.
Keep your slides visual with minimal text on.
Yeah, don't let them do the talking. You do the talking, they're backing you up, not the other way around. Yeah.
And then I guess read the room as well. Just, are people yawning? Are people resting their eyes? Are they energized?
At some point you get up out your seat, you do a bit wandering around, you go and point to the screen, you get back down it. So it's just keeping it a bit active, isn't it?
I did think about doing the sort of come on everybody, jumping jacks, everybody. Let's do 5.
Well, we did have the after lunch slot, did we not?
Yeah.
So that's not great.
So I was going to try and
graveyard shift.
Do my best 80s keep fit impression.
I think we're all luckier for the fact that you passed on that
Didn't
opportunity.
Do that.
Yeah. Okay, so that was the during. So we've done the prep, the before, we've done the delivery of the pitch, the during, and then the after. And this is where a lot of people can just forget the after. They walk away, think, well, we'll wait for the phone to ring then.
Yeah, the euphoric. So you've got the golden hour, apparently. There's a golden hour after the pitch.
Where the glow is still there, the embers of the campfire after
Exactly. You could still toast a marshmallow on it. So you've got to...
That's your golden hour.
That's the golden hour. So you've got to say thank you within that hour, apparently. Mm-hmm. That's what the rule is.
That's the rule. It's a rule, is it?
So that's why it's good, I said before, have your prep done.
Yeah.
So you don't have to do it when you're on the M1.
Yeah, have it timed, so you just push the button. And out it goes.
And you could do loads of things. So if you're time limited in your pitch and you've got loads of other stuff that you want to share, well, that's great time after. So look at all these other resources we've got, or how about listening to this podcast, or how about reading this, or download this, or whatever. So you can make that really good. And if you were, you could then build in some kind of nurturing or whatever it is. I mean, context sensitive, right? So know your audience.
But you may have had questions on the day that whilst you answered it as best you could at the time, maybe you could research a bit of data that backs it up, or an anecdote or a link, and you can send that on afterwards to
come back to you or
help
something,
the people that had those questions. Yeah, I think the point is to keep that conversation going.
Yeah.
So if there's anything in their mind lingering around, who on the day do I remember most, make sure that they're remembering you because you keep in touch.
And sometimes I think it's not just about the product that you're selling, it's about your company, isn't it? So we were talking about this before, like how do you design, whatever business you're in, how do you design a customer or client experience that is Michelin star or, pick your kind of first class on whichever airline or whatever it is you do. How do you create that experience for people? So actually following up after a pitch could be something like that. You could send something, you could, bribery act and everything. Here's 5 cases of champagne. but no, like just what do you want to leave? What's your lasting impression with people that can carry on? How do you develop that after the pitch? There will be some impression made pre-pitch. You've been asked to pitch, so they've looked at you and seen you and they want you to be there. You're going to make an impression during the pitch, but actually after the pitch, you've got quite a good opportunity to really start to, give them a flavour of what it's going to be like to work with us.
Yeah, that's true.
Proactive,
before
fast.
they've engaged you, getting some of that customer experience.
So
that's good. I think also as well, there were a number of comments in the room that were quite helpful to our case. People were saying supportive things or agreeing with what we said. That's worth a thank you follow up. Appreciate you chipping in when you did. Thanks a lot for that. If there's anything I can do to help, that's great. And similarly, those that you could tell around the room that still had doubts and questions, you can follow up and say, notice you mentioned that. How about such and such? Yeah. So I think that's worth all of those things are following up on, aren't they?
Yeah, I think don't be offended if people ask questions that maybe are a little bit either pointed or. They're trying to understand it, aren't they?
That's what I do. Yeah, you've got to help them to do that. That's their job. And we did mention a few episodes ago that if you're in a position where you have to do a bit of cold calling, then ChatGPT is a great training aid because you can tell it what persona to adopt and practice with it. Same thing here. You can get ChatGPT to behave in the persona of someone on a panel, selecting a vendor, and just say, come up with some, polite, professional, but slightly awkward questions and just start rehearsing them. Yeah. It's a great way of doing that.
That would be an interesting thing to kind of, just go through that exercise, isn't it? Just say.
And then the other thing, like any good process like this, you do a review after it. So there's the golden hour bit where you're doing things with the client, but then internally ask yourselves, what could we have done better? So we did a little bit of that, didn't we? And said, well, nothing major, but there's certainly things you can always improve. You can always improve, can't you? So we did a little bit of that as well. So I think it was a good experience. We learned a lot, and we thought we might share it because we know that not all salespeople do that a lot or enjoy doing it when they do. So think about it in those 3 chunks: the before, during, and the after. And hopefully you took something away from that. That might be helpful.
I think it applies as well to things, like exhibitions, like anything you're doing really. That's where you're putting, if you replace pitch with how do we put ourselves forward. It's that, okay, how do we put our best foot forward in preparing? How do we make sure we do it really well when we're doing it? And how do we then create a follow-up system that helps you get a taste of our culture, what it's like to work with us? Yeah,
it's a nurturing bit, isn't it? So just be clear on your value proposition. That should see you through then. If you know your project, your product or service well, and you're very clear on what makes you different and what your value proposition is, then the rest should follow and you'll be able to cope with any question. Good. Thanks for that, Rich. That's all right. Thanks for putting up with me in the car to and from. That's where I drive each way yesterday. So thank you again for listening to another episode of the SME Growth Podcast.